Hi, this is Matthias again at Carolina Raptor Center. I'm here today with Renee, one of my co-workers. We're going to talk about great horned owls. First, we're going to go catch us a great horned owl. So let's step into the cage and we'll show you how we catch one of these owls in a cage.
So this is one of our rehab. Is this a flight cage, Matthias?
It's a small flight cage. For a great horned owl, it's not really big enough to be considered a flight cage. You can see this bird is about 8 weeks old. He can already fly, and that's why he's in here. We'll talk about the stages here in a little bit. But for now, let's see what he'll do. He wants to show him the threat displays. He wants to threaten you. Okay. So he knows exactly what he is. He knows that Renee is the enemy.
Good catch.
So we use a padded net to catch them, to protect them. Notice it doesn't have netting in it. That would be harder than their feathers.
Mm-hmm.
So Renee's going to try to get control over his legs and his wings and his feet. There's a lot of moving parts.
So are the feet the most dangerous part when handling these birds?
Yes, they are the strongest part. They can bite you, but the feet can really hurt you.
Which he's doing.
Which he's trying to do. Everything, so he's being a good role model here.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have him under semi-control. So now we can check him out if we needed to. In this case, we're just weighing them. We'll make sure that there is 4 of them altogether in this cage.
How old is this baby?
He's about 8, 9 weeks, somewhere in that range. So you can tell he's still downy looking, but his feathers are fully developed. His feet are full size. His skeleton is full size. His feathers may not be quite there 100% yet.
There's a question, is that the bird clacking its beak?
That is the bird clacking speech. That's one of his vocalizations, so to speak. He's telling us to back off. Of course it didn't work in this case, but now he's got my glove. Alright, let's go put him in a box. So we're going to weigh him.
So are these birds that you're hoping to release back out into the wild?
Yes, there's a group of 4 great horned owl babies. They're hopefully all going to leave us soon. They still need to go into a larger flight cage eventually. These were all young birds that were brought to us from various locations all over the Carolinas that could not be placed back with their parents for various reasons. We'll talk about that again in more detail. So we've got our scale tared out so we know, wow, this is a big bird. 1,603 grams, let's say. That is a large...
He's gained 70 pounds. 70 grams.
That's a large great horned owl. That's about as heavy as they'll get in the wild as adults with females. The males tend to be smaller.
So you would say that's full grown?
That's full grown as far as weight is concerned. Again, the wings we'd have to look at more carefully to decide, but they're probably close to full. So that's about 3.5 pounds. I'm guessing it's probably a female. You can't tell the sexes apart just by looking at them, but this would have to be in the weight range of a female. All right, let's step outside while Renee is releasing these guys, and we'll talk about great horned owls in a little more detail.
So how often do you get weights on them to make sure they're growing and healthy?
Right now, we only do this about once a week. They've been with us for several weeks now, and we're pretty comfortable with how much they're eating on their own. Early on, when they were younger and we just received them, we would weigh them every day or every other day to start with. Oops, don't block it. Just to make sure that we knew how much each bird was going to need in terms of food amount, and also to make sure that if there's a group together, they all get their share. They're not necessarily going to share in the wild. They certainly wouldn't. They're competing against each other. Even in the same nest, the youngsters would compete for food. So the bigger ones like that female would certainly win out over a smaller male that might only weigh 2 pounds versus 3.5. So there's a significant size difference in some cases. All right, come over to our prop table. So, great horned owls are the earliest nesters in our area. In fact, in December, you can start hearing the adults. And if you've never heard an adult call, some of you might have heard an adult call. Let me give you an example. See if this will pick up on. Hopefully you heard that. So that's the adult call. So they nest in January, lay their eggs in January. Here is an example of what their eggs look like a large chicken egg. They would lay 1 or 2. This one actually came from one of our display birds. In fact, this was our foster mom this year, Maddie, who's been with us for a number of years. Started laying eggs, so we knew she might be inclined to take care of youngsters. And we brought her over to rehab for a little while so she could take care of these babies. They grow up really fast. So like from this egg to that size, literally 8 to 10 weeks. It's amazing how fast they grow up, which also means they need huge quantities of food. So whereas an adult great horned owl might eat 3 to 4 mice a day, maybe 100 grams or 3 ounces, let's say, these babies could easily eat 3 times that much. And one of the reasons is that, of course, not only are they growing, but they're also developing all their tissues, muscles, bones, organs, and their feathers all at the same time. So there's a huge amount of growth happening right offhand. So in March and April is when we get calls from the public about great horned owl babies on the ground. And what they do in the wild, it's part of their natural growing up, is they leave the nest way before they can fly. Probably when they're 4 or 5 weeks old, maybe even before, they might start venturing out of their nest. And the nest, by the way, is just like a stick nest that they've taken over. The adults have reclaimed maybe their old nest or taken over a hawk nest that they found somewhere. So they venture out onto the nearby branches, and they're in fact called branchers, because that's where you might see them, not back in the nest anymore, but out in the branches near the nest. The parents will still feed them, bring them food, and they start flapping their wings and exercising, doing kind of what these guys are doing in this smallish cage, starting to build up a little bit of flight muscles. The problem is that sometimes they'll end up on the ground, and of course on the ground, these babies, when they're young and can't fly yet, they're pretty vulnerable. So we have to get them off the ground in one way or the other. The adults cannot pick them up physically and move them back up. Some of these guys can climb really well. Barred owls are excellent climbers. Great horned owls, I'm not sure they can climb quite as well. So that's where they need assistance. So when you see a baby owl like this on the ground, unless it's obviously injured, you can always call somebody, wildlife rehabilitator. But if it's not injured and the adults are still there, literally picking them up and putting them on a tree limb 6, 8 feet off the ground is the first step, the best step. They need to stay with their parents if at all possible. They'll grow up much better than they would in captivity.
So the parents are probably teaching them things that it's a lot harder for us to teach them.
It is, although they have a lot of instincts they rely on, so they know how to fly. It doesn't not something that they need to be shown how to do. They instinctively know how to fly. They know kind of what to chase, what to feed on, although it probably helps them. The parents might show them what specifically lives in this area so they can focus on those types of prey items. So they have a lot of instincts, but still, it's always better if they grow up with their own kind. There's preening going on, they're communicating, they're talking to each other. This is why we use a foster parent here. So if we can't get them back in their own nest, and sometimes that even means building a new nest, like right underneath the old one, if we can't get them up into a tree way up high, just putting a platform up on a tree 10 feet off the ground, putting that baby in there is the next step. Parents will still find them. Just because they've been handled by us doesn't mean they would get abandoned. So it's called re-nesting. We focus on that in the springtime with all the different species of hawks and owls. Try to get back to their own parents, leave them where they are, if everybody's healthy, if everybody's still there. But if we have to bring them here, because we can't find a nest, like cases with all these babies that we just weighed, there was 4 in this group. We can't find the original site, or they're transported by several people and we can't get them back there. So we raise them here. We might use things like a puppet, like this feeding puppet. That looks pretty darn real. His eyes are a little bit off, maybe. But that's one step closer to raising them. you know, we raise them in groups with a foster parent or with a puppet. We used Maddie this year, one of our display birds, and she took great care of the babies. Um, and then eventually they go into a medium-sized cage like this, and then later on into a large flight cage. So because they're large birds, they need a 100-foot flight cage to really learn how to fly.
So when you're using the great horned owl puppet, you're trying to keep these babies as wild as possible.
Right. We are trying to prevent imprinting, first of all. So birds learn who they are by what feeds them, what takes care of them when they're young. And this happens starting at about 1 week of age, when their eyes start to open up. Between 1 and, let's say, 5 weeks of age, in that critical time period, they learn who they are by watching their parents. If their parents is a cardboard box, they're going to learn to be a cardboard box, which is very sad. So anything we can do to avoid contact with people. So when we take care of them, we will wear camouflage, for instance, so that they can't see us, but they'll focus on their parent, quote unquote.
So you look like a bush, and then they're looking at their parent.
And the parent happens to have a mouse in its beak that they'll feed them. So we're trying to get as close to nature as we can, even in captivity. And eventually, you know, these guys, like this last one we saw, is behaving quite nicely. He knows exactly what's happening, so he should be fine to be released. The problem is when you're raising them from a very young age and there's no contact with birds and there's only contact with people, that'll be a disaster. That means that bird will not be released. Let me see what else we have. Oh, I was going to show you, I don't know if you can get close enough to see. So here's a wing of an adult great horned owl. All the feathers are fully developed, and this is what a baby great horned owl's wing would look like. You can see all these feathers are still developing. There's in fact blood inside the feather shaft. We call these blood feathers. So while they're in this stage, we have to be very careful how we handle them because they might break them and damage them. This would be, you know, roughly a half-grown great horned owl baby wing. This is at the time when they can start to fly, but they don't have the strength or the size of the wing yet to fly like an adult.
So how long will it take for those feathers to fully grow?
You know, from a tiny little sprout to a full developed feather, probably somewhere around 6 to 8 weeks, roughly. So it's a pretty quick process if you think about it. And again, going back to food, they grow all these at the same time. So you need a huge amount of calories or a number of mice.
There's a question here, how often do they eat when they're young?
So they can eat very large quantities at a time. And when you're watching a nest in the wild, you know, you could miss the parents coming by easily because they might just drop off a mouse or two every hour and then fly off. And at this age, these guys are well on their way eating on their own. So they might only have to eat 3-4 times during a 24-hour period, as long as it's a big enough meal. So maybe a small rat or 2 to 3 mice at a time would be considered a pretty good-sized meal, and then they're good for a couple hours. And then they'll make a food begging call, and I've got another recording here, if I can find it real quick, to show you what the food begging call sounds like. I don't have a picture with that. Hold on, it's almost there. That.
So it sounds very different than the adult
Very different
call.
than the adult, right. So that's the call that the babies will make while they're in the nest or while they're in their surrounding trees to let the parents know, hey, I'm hungry. And they'll do this for weeks, of course, even when they're fully flighted already, you know, in July, when they're way beyond needing food. They'll still try to food beg from the parents. Sooner or later, the parents will start ignoring them because they need to be forced out of the nest, so to speak. But you can hear this in the wild, and you hear it in captivity too. So it's a good thing to hear as long as it's not directed at people. It needs to be directed towards an adult owl. That's a normal thing. Another thing I was going to show you is a close-up of their feet. So you probably saw the feet that great horned owl had when we were handling them. That's the working end of a great horned owl. Cute, fuzzy feet. Cute, I should say. They're not cute. They're actually huge. Very impressive. And they have an incredible amount of strength. For a bird that only weighs 3 pounds, this bird would have easily the strength of my hands, both hands combined. So if he grabs a hold of me, it will take 2 adult hands to pry these feet open, pry this 1 foot open. It's amazing how strong they are for their size.
Wow.
And another close-up. So you saw the impressive yellow eyes of the great horned owl, and there's showing you what a skull of a great horned owl looks like. The eyes are huge, they take up a large amount in the skull, and they're supported by these eye rings, bony rings that give the eyes their shape and size. And of course up here is where you'd have the pupil to be yellow.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Matthias.
Okay,
This is
you're
awesome.
welcome.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.